Alaska Airlines has teamed up with Hawaiian Airlines to create new nonstop international flights. Go to alaskaair.com or hawaiianairlines.com, and I'll tell you more details later in the show. I'm Rachel Belle, and this is Your Last Meal, the show where celebrities share stories about the foods they love most, and we dig into the history, culture, or science of those meals with experts from around the world. Today on the program, Alton Brown. Alton Brown is best known for his Food Network show, Good Eats, that ran for 16 seasons. But he also hosted Iron Chef America and many other shows. He's also a New York Times bestselling author and just released his 10th book this week. It's called Food for Thought, Essays and Ruminations. This is the first time he's written something so personal, and he credits his wife Elizabeth for getting him through the writing process.
Writing this book messed with me in ways that I hadn't been messed with before. And I was in a raw kind of fetal position, I think, in the corner. So I almost didn't cook through the whole writing of the book. And so what's so wonderful about food, when you simply allow yourself to be nurtured by another person. And I've often said that there's no better meal than a meal made for you by someone who loves you.
It has been 32 years since the Food Network launched, and we'll hear all about its very clunky start from Alan Salkin, who wrote the book From Scratch, The Uncensored History of the Food Network.
This thing that nobody thought was a good idea at first, it was ridiculed and then became a media company with billions of dollars.
That's coming up later in the show, but first, my conversation with Alton Brown. In 1999, Alton Brown's quirky, science-forward cooking show Good Eats started airing on Food Network. But he never aspired to host a show. Before becoming one of the most famous faces of food television, Alton had an entirely different career behind the scenes. Did you really start your career directing music videos, and were you the cinematographer on the One I Love REM video?
I was the director of photography on that. Most of my early work in videos was as a cinematographer, not as a director. I directed TV commercials primarily, up until when I decided I couldn't go to culinary school. But yes, I shot The One I Love. I did. I was like 24.
Really? I mean, that's an amazing job to get out of college.
Yeah, I was an ambitious little guy.
So let's talk about how you got into food. I understand it had to do with your displeasure of the current cooking shows that were on at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, in the late 80s and early 90s, I mean, I was a pretty serious hobbyist cook. And maybe because I was in the television business, I watched a fair amount of TV, and I thought the shows were just really bad. And you have to remember, like Julia wasn't really making a whole lot of TV then. She was doing a lot of direct-to-market videos, and she was concentrating on books. And so mostly we had, PBS, with like the Great Chef series and a few other things. And it was like, oh my God, they're boring. And I'm not learning anything. Yeah. Above all, it was like the best you would get out of a half-hour show was a recipe, if you wrote fast.
Yeah. And I'll never forget that croquembouche from the beginning of the Great Chefs where they were spinning the sugar. I mean, I was a kid when that happened, and I loved that part of the credits.
I did too. You loved it until you did it.
Yeah, I never did it.
You probably didn't really love it like the first 200 times. But I did feel that there was something really lacking in food programming. And I thought that food media might be the next big thing. So I thought, if nobody's going to make the show that I want to watch, maybe I ought to make the show that I want to watch. So I did.
But you weren't planning to be the host.
I was not planning on being the host. No. I was planning on being the writer and the director because that's what I knew. All my time had been behind the camera. I had a theater degree. I'd done a fair amount of theater, but that's not the same, right? But we couldn't afford a professional. In the beginning, we couldn't afford anybody. So okay, I'll do it. I'll stumble through it. I'll do my best. And then when we get some money, we replace me first thing. And that just never worked out. By the time that we ended up on Food Network was like, no, you're the host. And I'm like, damn it.
Well, to take it back, though, a little bit, you pitched the show to the Food Network and they said no.
No, it's not that they said no to the show. They wouldn't even look at the tape. That was back at the time when Food Network, they did everything in-house. Mm-hmm. Most of us that had made the pilots for Good Eats, we didn't actually know the TV business at all. So we had to hire people to rep the show. And it was only after a programming executive from the network happened to see a clip of Good Eats on Eastman Kodak's website, because we'd shot our original episodes on film, that they got interested and called us up, and, the rest was literally history.
Yeah. I liked seeing in your book, there was a list of 3 people / shows that you were inspired by when you were thinking of the direction you wanted to go with this cooking show.
Yeah, it was Julia Child, Mr. Wizard, and Monty Python.
And that really comes through thinking of how your shows are.
It'd be really bad if I gave that and you looked at me like, what?
And as you mentioned in the book, also you realized later, Pee Wee Herman.
That was in retrospect that I had to realize that was really influencing me at the time. But Julia Child and Mr. Wizard and Monty Python were like old references to me. They'd been with me for a long time, so they had influenced me. Mr. Wizard was about applicable science and kind of the aha moments of science. Julia Child was about friendly practicality of getting food on the table. And Monty Python was about wacky comedy. And I still do believe that laughing brains are more absorbent.
We live in a food-obsessed world. There are zillions of food and cooking shows available 24/7 on several networks, and regular people are now making 6- and 7-figure incomes just by posting 30-second videos of themselves making turkey sandwiches and penne alla vodka in their kitchens. But as a lot of us remember, it wasn't always that way.
Food Network is not just partially responsible for food influencers and food Instagram. It's 100% responsible for it.
That's journalist Alan Salkin. He wrote From Scratch, the uncensored history of the Food Network. Alan interviewed hundreds of Food Network stars, executives, makeup artists, drivers, agents, and producers for the book, including folks like Anthony Bourdain, Emeril Lagasse, and Bobby Flay. The Food Network started in 1993.
Food Network comes along because there's a change in technology. The cable universe is going from 30 or 40 channels to 500 in the early 90s. And so some guys recognized an opportunity.
Some guys who weren't even interested in food, but were tasked with creating some kind of 24/7 niche television network.
And so these guys out of a small cable company in Rhode Island hired Reese Schonfeld, who had started CNN actually for Ted Turner. Ted had the idea, but Reese did it. And this weird sort of cable TV savant who never made any money from any of it, Joe Langan, has the idea of maybe we should do a 24-hour channel with cooking shows. And so these two basically come together and start the network at a tiny studio in the worst neighborhood when New York used to have bad neighborhoods, by the entrance to the Holland Tunnel, which was known as a prostitute walk, and even Julia Child would greet the ladies as she arrived.
And to be clear, neither of these guys were interested in food or cooking.
No, Joe was obsessed with pizza and was known to drive around with 2-day-old pizza in his back seat. And Reese had his kitchen removed from his apartment.
I didn't know you could have your kitchen removed.
Do you live in New York?
I mean, I know about putting sweaters in the oven, but taking it out completely, I've never heard of that before. So there were 3 criteria when they were trying to pick a new network. What were those 3 things they were looking to meet?
I think the 3 things were that there was an advertising base, that there was enough content for 24 hours a day, and that it was an area that nobody else had done yet.
Some of the early original programming ideas sound pretty silly compared to the Food Network that I'm familiar with.
I mean, one was for newly divorced men. And that actually became a show that was Emeril's first show called How to Boil Water. That's how that sort of evolved.
The ones that I thought were funniest was cooking for babies and then what moms should eat while pregnant. There was a lot of emphasis on moms and dads.
And this is really because Reese didn't know anything. You know, men were starting this thing and they just thought this is a network for women. That's what they thought. So how are we going to get the women to tune in? And, oh, well, women have babies, right? So let's put some of that on there.
And then they also wanted to do a Larry King style call-in show that I think was called Food News and Views.
A Larry King style show, of course, comes directly from Reese having started CNN and Larry King being the biggest star there. And by the way, Food News and Views, you know, that was one of the first shows. It was a daily news show that was an hour long and hosted by David Rosengarten and the then mayor's wife, Donna Hanover Giuliani. And there was also a call-in show that was eventually hosted by Robin Leach, who was famous for Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. That was where Bobby Flay made his first appearances.
Are there any shows that we would remember today with people that we all know today?
Well, yeah, it was How to Boil Water, which was Emeril's first show, which was literally like put water in pot, turn on stove. Here's how to turn on the stove.
And he didn't really want to do that, right? Because I was reading that he felt it was too basic and maybe a little bit insulting to his level of cookery.
I mean, Emeril was and is a great, world-class chef. And it takes a while for them to get Emeril the right show. They try him on that one, and then Essence of Emeril. And then finally they find Emeril Live, which becomes, the tentpole of the network for a decade. Bobby Flay did have a show on the initial run, which was called Grillin' and Chillin'.
I remember that.
Right. Well, you remember it, but it's funny. They shot the whole thing. They shot 42 episodes in a week on the back lot of HSN, I think, in Florida, because there was a cheap place and they could shoot it in the winter. And I think Bobby got paid $400 an episode for that.
Wow. Part of the reason they wanted to launch the network was that they thought it was kind of a cheap thing to shoot. It wasn't as expensive as other shows.
Yes, and the business plan, which to not get into too many details, was thought to be insane and impossible. And in fact, really kind of was. And it took them about 8 years of existing before they turned any profit at all.
Everybody was learning on the fly, including hosts like Sarah Moulton, who cut herself during early tapings.
They're used to looking down at your hand, and the producer's telling you, look up at the camera, and you to have to figure out how to cut without looking down is a weird skill that's really important. Yeah, Sarah didn't have ovens, and a lot of them didn't have ovens. Mario Batali, if I can even mention his name now, would bang his knee against the countertop to make the sound of an oven door closing. There was a job early on that was basically slop bucket boy, because the sinks weren't real. They would just empty into slop buckets. Their job was to empty that. So, and Sarah also was upset because she felt that the male chefs were treated much better than the women. There were chefs who had a show only for like one season who would get their own apron with their own name on it for a camera and their own knives and everything, whereas Sarah just had all generic stuff. And she still to this day will talk about it.
Not surprising.
No.
This network started by men. And then on the note of Mario Batali, he of who we usually do not speak, he had a cutting incident as well.
Yeah, on his first show, when he cuts his hand, he ends up just jamming his hand down into tomato sauce so you won't notice the blood.
When was there a shift when chefs did become celebrity chefs?
Okay. First of all, there's a guy named Shep Gordon who we haven't mentioned. There was a documentary made about him called Supermensch.
I loved that. Wasn't he Mike Myers' agent or manager?
Yes. Okay. Also Alice Cooper, the rock musician. I mean, there's a famous story about, we're not talking about Shep forever, but okay. Shep is a genius who got to know Emeril just by going to Emeril's restaurant in New Orleans. And he found out that Emeril had this TV show and suggested, you know what, you should make some spices and just make part of your deal that they'll advertise your, Essence of Emeril on your TV show. And to this day, Shep is getting mailbox money because he owns part of Emeril Spices. But Shep before that, in the late 80s, Shep had recognized that people like Wolfgang Puck and others were not paid well. Shep had represented rock musicians before they were getting paid right in the late 60s and early 70s, and he had figured out how to turn them into brands. And so he said, we're going to do the same thing. There's articles that I found from the late 80s about this guy named Shep who was creating quote-unquote celebrity chefs. It really starts happening, I'm going to really date it to Bobby Flay's appearance on Iron Chef Japan. When they come to New York and film an episode, this becomes Japan versus the United States, a major international confrontation that gets treatment in Time magazine and front pages of newspapers. The attention that Bobby got, the president of Food Network comes to him after and says, you saved the network. You put the network on the map.
Wow.
And I really think we can date the modern era of celebrity chefs and obsession with chefs with that Iron Chef Japan episode.
Data shows that a lot of people who watch the Food Network aren't actually influenced or motivated to cook. Most people weren't running to the store to buy the ingredients for a recipe they saw Rachel Ray cook. So why do they watch?
Watching the fire is one of the oldest shows on earth. You know, it goes back to cavemen. And I think that there's a comfort in just watching somebody cook. Food is an essential need. And so, you know, watching somebody prepare something that looks nourishing, even if you're not going to get to eat it, feels good. And so it's actually almost a substitute for eating well, just as porn is a substitute for intimacy. If you care, you can pick up great knowledge. And there are many people, even if it's not everybody, who were inspired and became chefs and are. Most of the people probably running great restaurants now were kids and teenagers who became obsessed with Food Network and learned a lot that way. It was a cooking school for a lot of people.
Alan says there were only two people who wouldn't talk to him for his book, Ina Garten and Alton Brown.
In my opinion, really the biggest genius who was ever on Food Network. And a difficult guy who would not give me an interview and actually blocked me on Twitter eventually. I don't know what his beef is with me, but like I still will tell you he's a genius. That show was incredible.
For the record, I thought Alton was a delight to talk to. He is incredibly thoughtful, he's smart, he's charming, he's engaging. So lucky for you, we have lots more with him coming up after the break. Alton Brown famously despises single-use kitchen gadgets, but he shares the one thing he thinks everyone should have and value in their kitchen. Imagine boarding an Alaska Airlines flight in Seattle, and just 10 hours later, you're in Tokyo, ready to eat your weight in convenience store onigiri and steamy tonkotsu ramen. No stops, no layovers. Well, starting May 12th, Alaska Airlines is offering exactly that. Alaska has teamed up with Hawaiian Airlines, and this October, they're also starting nonstop service between Seattle and Seoul, South Korea. You can even treat yourself to seats that lie flat in the premium cabin. Book your trip now at alaskaair.com or hawaiianairlines.com. Bridal Magazine once asked you to create a list of 10 kitchen tools that every couple needs. And your number one tool was the table, the kitchen table. Why?
Because nothing that happens in a kitchen matters if you don't have that table. It's really the hearth. Back when we cooked all of our meals by the fireplace, you know, the hearth was the center of the house. It actually was often referred to, at least back in the Greeks, they called it focus, the focus of the house. And we don't really have that anymore, but what we do have is the kitchen table. And all the family business that happens there and all of the community and communal activities of eating happen at that table. So to me, you can have all the tools in the world. You can have the finest ovens, refrigerators, whatever. If you don't have that place where you break bread, and I'm tapping it because I'm actually at ours right now. You don't have that, then you're kind of missing the point. So I really did want to emphasize that if you're starting a family, you're starting a community, which is a couple, a married couple is a community. You need that, and you need to pay attention to it and make it be important. This was not the answer they were looking for.
Right. They didn't publish the article, right?
They didn't publish the list. They were like, we want you to talk about the new KitchenAid, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, that's not, don't tell people that, because then they just go and they get on the registry and they get all these fancy tools and they don't know how to use them and they don't know what they do. So they either go to the attic or the basement or whatever. No, the table, get a table. Yeah, they didn't want to hear it.
Your answer is so much more interesting and unexpected. And I think people would actually, kind of get caught by it instead of just a list of items.
I think that a list of items was back then what drove advertising, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I do believe it. I don't know about you and your family, but I have more memories of the kitchen table than probably any other piece of furniture in the house. Of any of the houses that I lived in as a child, the kitchen table moved with us. It was the same table every time. I still have it.
Oh, you do?
It is. We don't live with it because I like square tables. It was a round table, and I prefer square tables. It may have something to do with my table manners. I don't know, but I do have it, and I have some bad memories. at that table, but a lot of really, really good memories. And I think that having that center of the kitchen, the heart of the kitchen, is really critical.
Does your table have a story of where it came from?
The table that I at right now does, yeah, because it was a hunk of oak that came from a very old tree at my office that had to be taken down because it got sick. But I refused to get rid of the wood, so I had a portable sawmill, come in and cut the entire tree into slabs. And the first slab after it dried was made into this table.
Oh, that's cool.
So it has history. I'm a big believer in wooden tables. I like the feel of wood and the kind of the temperature of wood and the way it scars and the way it has memories.
I hate to ask you this question, but I have to because it's the crux of my entire show. But I did read in your book, there's a chapter that says, I get asked these same 5 questions constantly. And number 5 on that list is about your last meal. But, can't escape it here. What is your last meal?
Well, when I wrote the book, I was in a really sentimental place. It's my 10th book. But when you write a book of essays, you kind of, if you do it in a memoir-esque manner, you're pretty stripped bare by the time it's over. And there was the last essay that I wrote for the book. And my wife, Elizabeth, had taken amazing care of me during the really kind of trying. It was... writing this book messed with me in ways that I hadn't been messed with before. And I was in a rather raw kind of fetal position, I think, in the corner. So I really looked to her feeding me. She fed me through the whole time. I almost didn't cook through the whole writing of the book. And so when I reflected on it, I realized that what's so wonderful about food, or one of the things that's so wonderful about food, is when you simply allow yourself to be nurtured by another person. And I've often said that there's no better meal than a meal made for you by someone who loves you. I don't care what it is. There is something tangible, viscerally different when you're fed by someone who loves you. And she had taken wonderful care of me and nurtured me through this fairly kind of traumatic event in my life of writing this thing. And
can I interrupt you for a moment? I'm just curious, was the trauma the subject that you had to dig into?
It was the place that I had to dig into, meaning me. I have spent my entire life being presentational. Me on Good Eats. It's me, but it's me through some filters.
Of course.
Because you're in media, you don't go fall on you. You don't, because it's dangerous. You don't. You create another thing that looks like you. You make an avatar. And you make an avatar that looks like you, smells like you, sounds like you, but isn't quite you. And I thought that, well, I'll just keep doing that as I write this book. But I had to dig into chunks of me that I were icky.
Yeah.
Not because they were icky subjects necessarily, but simply because you have to start asking yourself, first off, there's a lot of reminiscence, and I don't have a rearview mirror in my life, but you have to go back.
Yeah.
Do a lot of this stuff. And so some of the childhood stuff was really difficult. And I didn't expect it. I thought, well, I'll just be glib and clever, because that's always worked for me. And then all of a sudden you're sobbing for an hour, or you're not able to write. Trauma is an overused word, and I shouldn't say it. It was very challenging and very hard and rewarding in ways that I didn't expect. But I found above all that I was vulnerable. I felt vulnerable through the process. And I made myself vulnerable. I volunteered for it, right? But I didn't expect it to feel the way that it did. So when I get to the whole thing about rethinking what the last meal is, I'm not just going to say I'm going to, chug 500 grams of good caviar and drink 10 Yoo-hoos and die. No, I'm going to really think about what would it really be like? And I found that mostly I just wanted to be alone with my wife in our little one-room lake cabin and have her make me dinner and just kind of have a quiet evening and watch some old movies and go to sleep. It's not glamorous. It's not shocking. It's not clever. Anthony Bourdain would have hated it, probably. But I realized that it was really, really true.
Is there a particular meal that she makes that you would request?
My wife never cooks the same thing twice. I hate her. She never writes anything down. She never measures anything. Her knife skills, I have to look away. It's like, I don't understand how she's still alive. And yet, like so many other witches that I've known in my life, she will turn around and put something in front of you that's like, well, that's what love tastes like. She's a witch. If it was the 14th century, she would have already been burned. But she can make soup and curries in a way that are dumbfounding to me. I know what I'm doing. I understand the technique. I understand the ingredients, and I can't cook like her. I can't. And I don't know that I'm glad of that or I'm not glad of it, but every time it's like, this is the best. I was like, this is the best whatever I've ever had. Did you write this down? And she's like,
No.
I'm like, we're never going to have it again. I will never get to have this dish again. She's kind of like, that's how I roll. I'm like, shit, I can't. Like, damn it, I can't live like that. I want to have repeatability. Anyway, so would it be one of her soups? Definitely. Her soups are, I don't know how she does it. When you're somebody like me who's pursued a craft and then you meet someone who's it's Salieri Mozart. It's what it is. It's like when you meet somebody that's like, they have a gift. They don't even really know they have a gift or care that they have a gift, but they do. And you just want to beat your head against the wall because it's like, all I wanted was that gift. All I've wanted is that. But, I don't have it. I have other gifts. But she's got that one. She's got that cooking. She's got the gift.
I agree that some people have that. I've not met many people in my life, but there's one friend I always think of who makes the most simple food. And it's like, what did you put in there? It just tastes like magic. And I'm wondering in your case, you might have proof from other people being around the table. I'm wondering if part of it is like food pheromones for you because you love her so much and you feel the love of her taking care of you, that it wouldn't taste the same if someone made the exact thing that she made.
I have asked myself this question because some people have written about this. I can't think of who right now, but that there is an actual that flavors change depending on who's making it, even though the food's exactly the same. I haven't decided whether I think that there's any validity to that or not, because I would like to think that any of these dishes that she makes that I'll never have again are the reason that they're more precious than if they were made in a restaurant is that I could go back to the restaurant next week and get the exact same one. Mm-hmm. Whereas when she makes it, I know I'll never have it again. And so I pay more attention. I invest myself and my sensory apparatus more, I think, into that experience. I am more present in that experience because I literally will never have it again. That dish is going extinct. I am the last person who will taste that. So I don't think it's got to do with love. I think it has to do with rarity.
I really like, though, that it brings you into the moment because that's a better way to eat. I've been a journalist for decades, and that's like a story that I've done in the past. You're supposed to not read the back of the cereal box. You're supposed to think of the farmer who made the asparagus. You can get in the moment. But it's hard. You're either talking to someone or, watching TV or looking at your phone, and you're like right there, man.
Well, it's an interesting point that you bring up. What are we supposed to be thinking about? What are we supposed to have? What are we supposed to have going on in our heads while we're doing this? Because it does affect everything, and it's funny that you would bring up cereal because I would say cereal tastes better when you're reading the back of the box.
Yes, I know.
Because
I love that.
I grew up looking at the back of the box cereal. They used to put all kinds of stuff on the back for kids, and this is after you had dug around for the prize. I'm older than you, so I remember probably bigger prizes, but that's part of the experience. I never thought about farmers while I was eating Cheerios, No. You don't, but that's okay, but then there are times that you do eat the asparagus that you think about the field that the asparagus came out of, especially if you happen to buy the asparagus at the edge of the field, which is always kind of a wonder. But, where we are in our heads when we eat, where we are in our heads when we cook, it's like I enjoy cooking more than I enjoy eating on an emotional level. I can't explain why. I get more out of the experience of cooking than I do eating. But when we do eat, who are we eating with? Where are we eating? What are we eating? Sorry about the noise. I live next to the train tracks.
On which side? The good side or the wrong side?
It used to be the right side. Then I moved here.
Wah, wah.
Everything went to hell. But what mindset you're in when you eat is, let's face it, most Americans are not in any mindset when they eat. They're not thinking about the food at all. We shove, we go. And I think that the difference between kind of a gourmand and a Newark gourmand is do you stop and really notice what's going on? I mean, if I sit in my car and really think about the Big Mac while I'm eating the Big Mac, is in it any less gourmet than any other meal? I think that perhaps the elevation of cuisine is in the mind of the eater as much as it is in the ingredients or anything else. It's where you are in your headspace.
For his last meal, Alton Brown wants one of his wife's witchy soups. And after all that talk about personal connection, we're going to swing the complete opposite direction and talk about AI. When we come back, Alton explains why he has zero worries about ChatGPT taking his job as a recipe writer. In his new book, Food for Thought, Alton writes about experimenting with cooking recipes from ChatGPT. What happened when you cooked these recipes? What was the result? What did you learn?
That as a professional recipe writer, I don't have anything to worry about. That's what I learned.
Alton asks ChatGPT to create a recipe, quote, in the style of a chef, usually his colleagues from the Food Network. He might throw out some ingredients or request a specific dish.
I made like 3 ChatGPT generated recipes that were inspired or in the style of Bobby Flay, and they all worked. By and large, they all worked. Everything that was in the style of Alton Brown sucked.
Why?
Oh my God, they were uncookable. You can't wrap asparagus around a baby shrimp.
Is that what it was asking you to do?
Yeah, one of them did. You can't. These things can't be done. And so what I realized is that apparently somebody has told ChatGPT that I'm culinarily clever or unexpected. And so all of a sudden it's telling you to make s'mores out of octopus. No, this isn't okay. But by and large, the problem is that artificial intelligence can't taste or smell food. It has no chemical sense. It has no textural sense. It has no interface for this. All it can do is go out in the ether and grab this and that and the other. And this technique got 3 stars and this over here. And hey, let's put sprinkles on that. It's okay that it's cod. We'll put sprinkles on it. And it all seems fine, but it's not. It's not. And I kind of got obsessed for a while with trying to cook these recipes, and they just got weirder and weirder and badder. So eventually we actually made one in our office the other day that none of us would taste. We're like, no, I'm good, man. No, I don't try that. I'm just going to say that it involved liver and peppermint. I don't want to get into it. I'm a little traumatized by it right now.
I think it's leaning too heavy on the Monty Python and not enough on the Julia Child.
Thank you. Very much so. But somewhere along the line, it got that idea, right? Somebody gave it that idea.
Yeah.
But it can't figure out what tastes good and what doesn't taste good. It doesn't know. And it doesn't understand, how pots and pans work and how people move in a kitchen. And that, if I can do a dish with 3 bowls, why would I do it with 15 bowls? And there's no reason. Yes, maybe I have 15 bowls, but that's not a reason. So I don't think we have anything to worry about. Those of us that write recipes, I think we're okay for a while.
Except for Bobby Flay.
Bobby Flay, because AI seems to have this stuff down. But I realized why, and I did a deep dive on this, is because Bobby, wisely, in a certain percentage of his recipes, will use the same ingredients over and over again. It doesn't mean that he's replicating himself, but he has a palate. And that palate is strong and bold, whereas apparently I don't.
I'm glad it turned out that way. I mean, it's very amusing.
It's amusing, but boy, has there been some money wasted on groceries.
Well, when you finally wrap the shrimp around the asparagus, I want to hear about it.
It doesn't work. You can't do it because we're talking about like a little baby shrimp. No. Until I can find somebody who's growing little bitty baby asparagus, like baby corn.
I was going to say they did it with corn. They could probably do it someday. Teeny weeny.
I haven't yet. Yeah. Because asparagus is a grass. I don't know that it'll work that way. But if they do, I'll wrap some around some shrimp.
And that was Alton Brown's last meal. On February 13th, Alton Brown hits the road to tour his new show, Alton Brown Live, Last Bite. And he says this is the last big tour he plans to do.
10 weeks is too long to be away from home. It's just not what I want to do anymore. I also think that when you're in media, You need to every now and then know when you should shut up and listen. I think I'm at a shut up and listen, not for like years, but for months. I don't feel that I have to be constantly relevant. We drift off, we come back, we reinvent. We don't reinvent. We retire. We don't retire. We die. I don't need to just like constantly be in front of everybody. So I'm just going to take a break.
Get tickets at altonbrownlive.com, or you can find a link in the show notes. He's also going on a book tour for his fantastic new book of essays, Food for Thought. You're an excellent writer. I mean, I don't need to be the one to tell you, but honestly, like, there's a lot of people.
My goal is to at least die a better writer. I adore writing.
You're already very good. And you wrote this on a typewriter?
One of my Hermes 3000s. Yeah, manual typewriters. I became obsessed with manual typewriters in high school and have kept them around ever since.
You can hear the rest of our typewriter conversation after the credits. Thanks to Alan Salkin, author of From Scratch, The Uncensored History of the Food Network. We just got into the basics of how Food Network started, but his book is full of juicy gossip. And I saved a really juicy part of our interview to play on The Leftovers next Thursday. Alan spills some really good tea about Martha Stewart and Ina Garten, and you can hear that right here in the Your Last Meal feed next Thursday. Also on next week's Leftovers, Alton will dig through his kitchen drawers to show me his most despised kitchen appliance.
My wife loves them. And when we did our live internet show during COVID, and she talked about them, so people started sending them to her. There was a point where we had like 7. A little triggered.
I know, I'm sorry. Next question. Your Last Meal is a product of Seattle's Cascade PBS. This episode was produced with Maliha Syed and mixed and mastered by Sarah Bernard. Original theme music by Prom Queen. I created, host, and co-produce Your Last Meal. Every once in a while, I'll meet someone who tells me, I don't get your episodes. They don't pop up in my feed. That is because you are not subscribed. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can hit the follow button. And if you like the show, please leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. It actually does make a difference. I'm Rachel Belle, and this is Your Last Meal.
You know whose first show was on Food Network?
Who?
Anthony Bourdain.
That's right.
Tell me you don't have a crush on Anthony Bourdain, ever.
Everyone has a crunch. I remember now in high school, my parents had their crushes and they were from the Food Network. My mom was in love with Emeril and my dad was in love with Rachel Ray.
No Giadas?
No Giadas. Sorry, Giada.
To me, the work of writing needs physical interface that I can't get from a keyboard, a computer keyboard, but I can get it from a manual typewriter, which I like to really kind of slap around. At the end of the day, my fingers have that kind of buzzy sensation.
Oh, yeah.
I feel pretty good about what I've written.
Yeah. I relate. I have 5 typewriters, but I honestly,
Do you?
Yeah, I have them mostly on display and I don't use them very often. Also, because it's kind of depressing to go to Office Depot and then you end up on this weird, you have to go through like a weird portal into 1925 and they're like, there's one ribbon you can buy. I'm like, okay.
Oh, but there are websites that are nothing but like ribbon
that's
work.
True.
I can get like silk ribbons for my Hermes machines from the late 50s. No, it's not Hermes like scarves, by the way. It's that made Bolex 60 millimeter cameras. There are whole communities out there where we can get that stuff. Yeah. Next
time you come to Seattle for a show, I don't know if you're coming up here for your tour. Are you familiar with a place called Bremerton that's across the water? No. There is a typewriter store that has been there forever and has almost closed many times, and somebody will go and, buy it. And the whole place, you can barely walk through. It's filled with typewriters. And he's a typewriter repair person. Let me look it up. Yeah, it's called Bremerton Typewriter Company.
Got it. I'm going to look it up when we're done here. I always try to learn where all the typewriter places are when I'm on tour. My favorite is in Mesa, Arizona. There's an amazing typewriter place or a repair shop and store. They're all over the place. They're hidden, but they're there.
They're there. They're there.